Good evening. My name is Nora Williamson, and I am a student in the MSPS Building Bridges Mentoring Program in the Mendoza College of Business. I welcome you on behalf of Building Bridges, the Kellogg Institute for International Studies, and the Berges Lecture Series. These partners are committed to bringing campus speakers to share their insights about international development and business ethics. Tonight's presentation features a conversation between marketing professor Patrick Murphy and Acumen CEO and founder Jacqueline Novogratz. Jacqueline Novogratz, who earlier today received the Notre Dame Award for International Human Development and Solidarity, is the founder and CEO of Acumen, a nonprofit global venture capital fund. The fund takes a market-oriented approach to promote human development by providing patient capital, a pioneering form of financing that combines features of venture capital and traditional philanthropy to bring critical products and services to areas of the world that are most in need. Since its establishment in 2001, Acumen has invested over $80 million in Africa and South Asia in 75 companies focused on delivering affordable healthcare, water, housing, and energy to people living in poverty. These companies have created and supported over 58,000 jobs and provided basic services to more than 100 million people. Novogratz chronicled her quest to understand poverty in a best-selling memoir titled The Blue Sweater, Bridging the Gap Between Rich and Poor in an Interconnected World. This book challenges readers to rethink their engagement with the poor around the world. Before founding Acumen, Novogratz founded and directed the Philanthropy Workshop and the Next Generation Leadership Programs at the Rockefeller Foundation. In the late 1980s, she worked in Rwanda as a consultant for the World Bank and UNICEF and helped co-found Duderember, the country's first microfinance institution. She began her career in 1983 as an international credit analyst at Chase Manhattan Bank. The recipient of an honorary degree from the University of Notre Dame in 2011, Novogratz sits on the advisory boards of Sonnen Capital, the Harvard Business School Social Enterprise Initiative, and the Stanford Institute for Innovation in Developing Economies. She is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and the World Economic Forum Global Agenda Council for Social Innovation. She serves on the Aspen Institute Board of Trustees and the State Department's Foreign Affairs Policy Board. Her innovative ideas have led Novogratz to be featured in Foreign Policy's list of top 100 global thinkers and the Daily Beast's 25 Smartest People of the Decade. She is a frequent speaker at forums, including the Clinton Global Initiative and the Aspen Ideas Festival. She holds an MBA from Stanford University. Joining Jacqueline Novogratz is Patrick E. Murphy, a professor of marketing in the Mendoza College of Business at the University of Notre Dame. He served as chair of the Department of Marketing for 10 years and was a Fulbright Scholar at University Cork College in Ireland in the 1990s and University of Lille in France in 2009. He specializes in business and marketing ethics. His work has appeared in leading ethics and marketing journals. His most recent book, Ethics in Marketing, International Cases and Perspectives, was published in 2012 by Routledge. He served as editor of the Journal of Public Policy and Marketing and is on 5 editorial review boards. His papers have won awards from 3 academic journals, Journal of Advertising, Journal of Macro Marketing, and European Journal of Marketing. In 2011, he received the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Marketing and Society Special Interest Group of the American Marketing Association. Professor Murphy holds a BBA from Notre Dame, an MBA from Bradley, and a PhD from Houston. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Patrick Murphy and Jacqueline Novogratz.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nora. Our mothers would be happy to hear that, right,
No kidding. Thank you, Nora.
And before we get started, I just wanted to recognize someone that's with us tonight. As you all know, this is the Berges Lecture Series in Business Ethics, and Jack and Margaret Berges, who live near campus, couldn't be with us tonight, but their daughter, Ann Pillay, is here. And Ann, welcome on behalf of the Berges family. I know that we really appreciate the support that your family has given the lecture series over a lot of years. So thank you very much. So we're going to have a little questions and answers, I guess, this evening. Jacqueline, maybe briefly you could give us your reason or reasons for founding the Acumen Fund. We heard quite a bit about it there.
We sure did. And thanks again, Nora. And thank you, Pat. And thanks to your family also. And happy Halloween to all of you guys. It's great. I do live in the West Village of New York, so I'm missing a wild parade tonight. But if there's any other place I would rather be in the world, it's here. And that's true because you go to an unbelievable school, as you guys all know. And it's somewhat connected to the founding of Acumen. I had always wanted to change the world. Didn't know how to do it. Probably not unlike a lot of you guys. Started my career in banking in Latin America, and that showed me how much I loved banking, and also how if you really wanted to reach the poor, markets by themselves wouldn't be enough. As Nora said, moved to Rwanda, started a microfinance bank. After the genocide, really saw that top-down approaches to aid, to development too often create dependence. And by that point, I had learned that dignity is more important to the spirit than wealth, and that we make a real mistake by defining poverty only in terms of $1.25 a day, which is what we're currently defining it as. And there had to be a better way. And so came up with this idea that if we could use philanthropy as risk capital, like serious risk capital, rather than do it in the traditional way. And in fact, one of my younger brothers thought I should name Acumen Ain't Your Grandma's Philanthropy. And if you could invest it long term in entrepreneurs that were using the tools of business but not constrained only by business, maybe we could do a better job at delivering services to the poor and ultimately breaking the back of poverty.
Great. Why don't you share with the audience, who I'm sure some of them are not familiar with your influential book, The Blue Sweater, and maybe the USA Today version of, I'm sure you could talk for hours on it, but to share with them, like in founding the company, your reason for writing the book.
So the book originally came about at a moment. I had founded Duterembre, and you did a great job saying it, which means to go forth with enthusiasm in Kinyarwanda. And I had really loved this part of my life. I was 25 to 28. We became one of the largest lenders in the country, not just to the poor. And I had simultaneously started this bakery with unwed mothers. And when the genocide happened, I really wanted to go back and understand. I wanted to see what had happened, and discovered two things. Of the group of women with whom I had started this bank, all of them had played out different roles in the genocide, from being bystanders to being murdered to watching their families be killed. And so I was trying to understand, well, what does it mean to be human? How do we reconcile good and evil inside of us? That monsters really do exist, not just in the way I thought that they looked. And in fact, we are each other. And then the other big thing that happened to me was I really wanted to go find the bakery. And I was looking all across Kigali. It was in this low-income, popular area called Nyamirambo. And I had this driver with me, and who had been my friend before, and we couldn't find any evidence that a bakery had existed. And finally, we saw this blue paint on the roadside in front of the bakery, which was a place that we had painted blue. And I knocked on the door. I was so excited that we finally found it, and the woman who opened the door couldn't speak French, which immediately meant that she was a refugee from Uganda. And she had no recollection that 20 women had changed their lives and changed the community and built a business. It was just gone. It was disappeared. And that was the moment that I understood viscerally, more than intellectually, what the Jews talk about when they talk about memory and the importance of holding the stories for those who are no longer here. And I thought, well, for better or worse, I have the stories of this little pocket, and I'm going to write a book about it. And then I started writing that book, and then I started Acumen, and then I had to reconcile how do you go from genocide to venture capital approach, and it just came out.
Great, great. Well, this afternoon, in her acceptance speech for the award, she actually read the, is it called Acumen Manifesto or our manifesto?
I don't really know what it's called. It's the, in fact, it was written with the word acumen in it, but I actually never read the word acumen because ultimately I think that in an interconnected world, we all need a moral compass to make decisions, and I'd rather just give it to the world,
right.
and for whatever they find use in it, right. They can take it.
Well, I'm going to embarrass Jacqueline and show you in her own words what's on the website. She reads the manifesto and then explains it, and then we'll pick up our discussion, Jim, please. And I think it's a good background for all of the audience here to see it.
Acumen. It starts by standing with the poor, listening to voices unheard, and recognizing potential where others see despair. It demands investing as a means, not an end. Daring to go where markets have failed and aid has fallen short. It makes capital work for us, not control us. It thrives on moral imagination, the humility to see the world as it is, and the audacity to imagine the world as it could be. It's having the ambition to learn at the edge, the wisdom to admit failure, and the courage to start again. It requires patience and kindness, resilience and grit, a hard-edged hope. It's leadership that rejects complacency, breaks through bureaucracy, and challenges corruption, doing what's right, not what's easy. Acumen. It's the radical idea of creating hope in a cynical world, changing the way the world tackles poverty, and building a world based on dignity.
Very powerful. If a picture's worth 1,000 words, a video's worth several thousand words. So that's the reason I wanted to show the video tonight. But to follow up, a term you used is one that we ethics professors like to use on a pretty frequent basis, moral imagination. And we're very pleased to see that in the manifesto. And maybe you could just share with us your views or your interpretation of moral imagination.
Great. Well, in the manifesto, as you heard, Pat, we talk about having the audacity to see the world as it is, and the humility to see the world as it is, the audacity to imagine what it could be. But when I talk to you, to our fellows, to our team members about moral imagination, it's really about being able to put yourself in another person's shoes and build solutions from their perspective. To inhabit another person's life, and with a great sense of humility. And I think it was Hume that said the moral imagination is easier with proximity, and the more distant we become, the easier it is to avoid that. And I think one of our great challenges is today in an interconnected world is to really hold that sense of imagination with the distance and find ways to transcend.
Very good. Very good. follow-up question that strikes even maybe more at the core of ethics that you could share with especially the students in the audience. Is there a particular moment or incident or dilemma, whether it's personal or professional, that you can point to in your life that brought what it means to be ethical into very sharp focus for you? And I'm sure there are many, but if you could maybe share one or two with us.
Yeah, I think, I mean, these days it's daily, because we do have to fight corruption. For me, what I think is so humbling are the many people that we get to work with around the world who do the right thing, not the easy thing, despite the fact that they have a lot, if not everything, to lose. And so there are so many examples. I mean, I've told this story on a TED Talk, but this woman I met named Jane, who was an ex-prostitute in the Nairobi slums, who really wanted to get a loan and so that she could start her life. But in this particular company that Acumen supported, you had to raise $50 to borrow $50. It took her a year. She could have stolen it. She could have found it any other way, but instead, piece by piece by piece, over a year, she saved $50. And she got a loan, and then she started a tailoring business, and now she employs 4 people, and through our company bought her own house, got a mortgage for her own house. And instead of choosing a life that's now about just protecting herself, she continues to reach out and continues to give. And she said, you know, when I look at my dreams, in some ways they've all come true. Even though I thought I would marry a good man, and I ended up marrying a really bad man who beat me, and that moved me into prostitution. I now have 3 children who love me, and I love them very much. And I thought I would be a doctor, but I couldn't go to school. And she said, but you know, I'm HIV positive, and yet I can afford the antiretrovirals, and I feel so blessed for everything that I have in life, that I volunteer and I work with HIV positive patients 2 days a week. And I tell them, you are not dead. Because you are not dead, it is your duty to serve and to give. And she said, so, you know, maybe I'm not a doctor because doctors give out pills. But me, maybe I'm better. Because me, I give out hope. And I meet people like Jane in the companies that we build, and I think that level of goodness, at some level we yearn for goodness as human beings. But all this junk gets in our way, and we take the easy way, not the right way. And if you could keep those people who have everything to lose in your mind, it makes it easier. The hardest thing for me ethically at Acumen are all the many decisions that we make that make our numbers, our metrics look worse than they would have to look. So we've had to, if we find corruption in a company, we exit, if we can, the investment, meaning we try to sell it to somebody else, or we really try to force loan repayment. In those cases where it's possible, you usually do so at a loss, at a discount. Best case is you get 85% of your money back. The world thinks you're a little silly because this company is going on and it's doing a lot of really good things for poor people. Our numbers look worse financially, and we don't take credit on the impact basis. That's why we talk about doing what's right, not what's easy. But when I look at Jane and I think about how the poor get cut out, get marginalized with corruption, it's easier to do the right thing, but it's really hard.
And that's a good message for the students.
It's a hard message. It's an important message because at the end of the day, all you have is yourself. And so if you can just build those things that nobody can take away from you, you do end up finding this great sense of joy. That I can promise you.
Great. Well, and speaking of the importance of other people in our lives. In my class, we were talking just the other day about role models or mentors, and I'm sure you've had several, and maybe you could share with the audience tonight a couple of the most significant ones you've had.
Sure. I do have them, and have had them, and partially it's recognizing how much other people have to teach you. So now I have mentors that are 30 years younger than I am, as well as 30 years older. But the mentor who meant the most to me was a man named John Gardner. I was actually at Stanford Business School, and I liked business school, frankly, but some part of me thought I was supposed to be an anthropologist, and there I was, taking all these vector analysis classes and being like, seriously? And so the way at Stanford, after you do the core, professors actually pitch their courses to you. And so we were sitting there watching these professors come up and talk about Black-Scholes theory and things like that. And I was kind of, breathing and thinking, and all of a sudden this older gentleman in a houndstooth suit and a fedora walks up on stage and takes his hat off, and he says, why do civilizations rise and fall? He says, why do some people live on into their 90s renewing and keeping this sense of curiosity about the world, and others get on the couch at 30 and frankly never get off? I'm going to teach a course about human renewal, organizational renewal, and civilization renewal. And I was like, I think I've just fallen in love with an 85-year-old. And so I literally went up to him after, and I knocked on his door, and I introduced myself, and I was so excited to meet him. I had no idea who he was. And all he told me at the beginning was that I had 2 different earrings on, which was true. But I thought it was kind of cool. And then I found out that this was a man who had advised everyone from Lyndon Johnson through, at the time, it must have been Ronald Reagan. And he was walking integrity. And he believed that if you committed yourself to something bigger than yourself, in some ways it was the only way you could find true freedom. And that changed my life, because I was the kind of overachiever that always wanted to keep my options open. And I was like, yeah, well, that sounds interesting, but maybe there would be something better. And then John came along and was like, it doesn't really matter what you do, just do it with your whole body, 100%. Because if all you do is keep your options open at the end of your life, all you have is a lot of options. So commit to something, be in it, and over time you will find yourself grounded in it. And when I started Acumen, he was still alive. And I was really scared. And I said, I don't really know what I'm doing. And he said, well, don't tell the whole world that. And he said, just start, let the work teach you. And that has become a deeply held mantra at Acumen. Just start and let the work teach you, which takes humility, but it works.
Great. And I would recommend to all our younger members in the audience to Google John Gardner and maybe even read something by him, because at a distance I was never fortunate enough to meet him, but I have high respect for him and his thoughts, and so it was great to hear that somebody in the business school is having a liberal arts professor really make that profound impact. Moving on to kind of ethics and values and integrity in organizations. I read about you about a year ago. I think it was the New York Times, the Corner Office interviewed you, and you talked about pairs of values. That one of the things that I discuss in my class are having integrity and fairness as core values, but you have a little bit different take on corporate or organizational values. So if you could share that with us, please.
Sure. We were looking at values at Acumen, and so I studied a lot of corporate values, and I thought, over time, it started to make no sense to me, like excellence, integrity, like who can disagree with this? On the other hand, in real life, in the real world, you're constantly trying to navigate choices. And those choices aren't always clear. In fact, the real choices are never clear. And so we started looking at those values in tension that might help us navigate better. There was one immutable value, which is integrity, respect, but then generosity and accountability. So if you're trying to change the world, it's really easy to be generous. You just want to love and make people happy and the personalities that it go into. But the truth is that you risk over empathy. You can end up just marginalizing yourself and doing no good for anybody, certainly not the people that you're there to serve. So you have to hold the accountability piece. There was this one night early on at Acumen. We had this big investment in a company that bought a pharmaceutical plant from about 3,500 smallholder farmers in East Africa, converted it to make a medicine for public health. And the company had about 10 days of cash. We put $350,000 in it, an additional $350,000. And then a couple months later, we get this phone call that they have 10 days worth of cash left. They need another $350,000 to bridge finance the company before it could raise other money. We knew that if we didn't put the $350 in, the company would die. If we did put the $350 in, we also knew that in 10 days we might have to tell the people who gave us this philanthropy that we lost it. And so what do you do? And we really sat there with wanting to be generous to the farmers and accountable to our investors, and just went back and forth. And then finally I said, well, who would I rather stand up in front of? The farmers and tell them that their whole livelihoods were gone? Or the humiliation of having to tell these people that I just raised this money from that I lost it? And was I willing to have that level of accountability? And I was. And thankfully, the company is still alive, but it was a really hard thing. Connected to that was in the early days, young entrepreneurs would come, and they'd never seen a term sheet. They didn't know how to negotiate valuation of their company. And so we were on both sides. We were investing in the company, but we also had to help them negotiate against us and be generous enough to do that, but recognize that if we gave them too good a deal, we would never help them transition to more traditional forms of capital. And so that tension has actually been really powerful for us. And I wish there were a roadmap that had a how-to guide. Mm-hmm. But it's that kind of thing. Listening and leadership. We always talk about at Acumen, it's important to listen. Start by listening. You always should listen. But there are days where you're like, I've listened enough. This is what we're doing. And if you can't live in that place, you're not going to be very effective as a leader. And then the third is humility and audacity, that we have to accept how hard it is and yet still have the audacity to believe that we're going to change this world. And we are.
Good.
We are.
Maybe switching to you're in a global company, global organization, and you brought it up earlier as well as this afternoon about corruption and how corrosive, if you will, corruption is to not only doing your business, but doing business in general. And maybe if you could share a bit with the audience about the challenges of doing business in the developing world, and corruption still being very much a day-to-day activity, and just sharing with those the struggles I'm sure you have with that.
Yeah. Well, to be really clear, though, I think that we're at a moment in history where corruption is endemic. And I think this goes actually to ethics and leadership courses, too. That too often, and you saw this in the financial meltdown of 2008, where some leaders who we look to be ethical, to run a financial system, would say somewhat cavalierly, look, I never did anything illegal. And you know what? We got to get better than that. It's do the right thing, not just the legal thing. So I would say that we've got deep corruption in the United States, particularly around campaign financing and our whole political system, politicians becoming lobbyists. And that is actually connected to the developing world corruption. And so when people hear me talking about corruption, they often think I'm talking about governments in the developing world. But I deal with entrepreneurs who are dealing with governments, other entrepreneurs, the developed world. I see it everywhere. And so it's corrosive, it's exhausting, and the people who really get hurt are the poor, over and over and over. Because what you see, and we saw this in housing in Pakistan, that for a low-income person, if you want to get on the bus, you often have to pay a bribe. I gave this speech once to a number of slum dwellers, and this young man said, I'm just like you, except that I couldn't get past third grade because I couldn't afford the bribes to get myself in. And I was thinking, you got to be kidding me. You have to pay bribes to get into third grade. And so for me, where I have come down much more like a hammer on corruption is with this understanding that it's not the rich who suffer from it. It is the poor long term. But you're making this trade-off. And so when we had this entrepreneur in Pakistan, he wanted to build housing. We put in patient capital investment for him to do this outside of Lahore. He refused to pay a bribe. Now, these bribes aren't a lot of money. And so you could see how easily one would say, well, this is the cost of doing business. I certainly have people in this same world who would pay. Javad is just an extraordinary leader, and he refused. I always assumed the registrar would be this like enormous man, but he turned out to be this like skinny, toothpick, one-armed, 31-year-old dweeby registrar, like sitting on the ground. And yet he had power. This was his power. And so it took us 18 months to get this land registered. And I was giving a talk at a business school in Pakistan, and this woman said, Ms. Novogratz, frankly, I think it's more unethical that you made those poor people wait to get housing than it would have been to pay a fairly inexpensive bribe and get them housing sooner. And I really thought about that, like, is she right? But ultimately, this company were the first mortgages in the history of Pakistan to ever give mortgages to low-income people. 18 months wasn't going to make much of a difference. Doing what was right, not what was easy, changed the game. And now, if you're building low-income housing in Punjab, in Pakistan, you can register with the state and bypass the local registrars because of the work Javad did. And everyone who's working in this industry knows not to mess with Javad. And so I really saw how very relatively quickly he was able to emerge as a man of integrity that people did want to do business with by doing what was right, not what was easy. And I saw that we talk about scale reaching millions. This was a fairly small example of how to build a viable community that repaid us so that we've invested again, and it changed the game.
And this afternoon, you talked a little bit more about his community building, and maybe we could just play that out a little bit about, that he was building houses, but he was doing far more than that.
Yeah, and we talk about standing with the poor, and I know that in some of your courses here you talk about accompaniment, but Javad built himself a house in that community, and over time over time, the community had to come to grips with the fact that there was one mosque in this community for 2,000, more than 2,000 people. And it's a really, really diverse community, not just Shia and Sunni, but also within Sunni Islam, all the different sects. Over the last few years, Pakistan has had enormous intersectoral violence and a lot of tension in urban areas. But here, Javad had to work with community leaders to figure out who got to use the mosque on Friday. And it would literally be like having Seventh-day Adventists and Catholics saying, who gets to use, church for noontime Sunday Mass? And what they ultimately decided to do, after a year of navigating and negotiating, that doesn't show up on anybody's balance sheet, was they identified the three most respected imams from three different sects. And those imams would rotate who led Friday prayers. And all of the community would sit behind them and pray together. And again, it's another story that when you tell it, makes people think of a different possibility of how we might live together. And it's where Javad is just a man and a leader I'm just so proud to have worked with. 9 years now.
Yes. And the community in its broadest, most meaningful sense, that he viewed his leadership role as forming a community that went to religion and far beyond just a place to live. So I think that's very powerful. And I want all of you to be thinking of questions asked, but my last couple of questions have to do with advice that you'd give our students who are going out in the business world and probably are not going to be fortunate enough to work for Acumen Fund, but what advice you'd give them for launching their careers and things as you look back on, and you worked in corporations before you're starting your current organization. So a few thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say well, first of all, I feel a lot of pressure. A lot of you guys are, graduating, and what do you think? I go back to when I was a senior at university, and I had worked to pay my way through university, and I really wanted to take a year off, quite frankly, before I figured out what I wanted to do. And my parents are very wise people. And so my mom and dad told me that that was fine as long as I went through the interview process, which was really a trick, but I didn't pick it up at the time. And so I got my requisite gray suit, which we had to wear at the time, which is kind of humiliating now. And I put my resumes in the boxes that took foreign affairs economics majors. And I only knew that I wanted to make a difference and that I wanted to travel and see the world. And my first interview was with Chase Manhattan Bank. And I walked into this interview, and this kind of cute interviewer sitting across from me said, Ms. Novogratz, tell me, why do you want to be a banker? Which was really the one question I shockingly was not prepared for. And so I said, well, I don't want to be a banker. My mom and dad made me do this interview, and that's why I'm here. And the guy leads back, and he's like, well, that's just too bad. Because if you got this job, you'd be in 40 countries in the next 3 years, understanding the political and economic situation in those countries. And I was like, oh, God. Because, this was all I ever really wanted to do. And so I said, do you think we might start this interview over? And he said, sure. So I left the room. I, took a breath. I knocked on the door. I was really assertive in putting my hand out and said, hi, I'm Jacqueline. And he said, so Jacqueline, tell me, why do you want to be a banker? And I said, ever since I was 6 years old, all I ever wanted to be was a banker.
This is an ethics lecture.
Yeah, I know. But he did know. No, but it did get worse, because then he was like, tell me everything you know about Saudi Arabia. And I was like, I don't know anything about Saudi Arabia. He was like, no, but you're on a roll now, so go. And I was like, all right. And I got the job. And I did, which is kind of unbelievable now that I look back on it. But the lesson for me was, you can have all these plans in your head, but there are going to be moments in your life where your body says, go. Just go. And you just got to go. And for me, there was this part of me that was afraid to go because I wanted things to be perfect. I wanted to do the right thing for everybody. And then suddenly I was sitting there and there was this thing that looked like I really wanted it until I didn't, which was in Rio, when all of a sudden I saw that the poor people didn't have access. And that was and so my first piece of advice is, sometimes your body tells you to go and go. Listen to it, because you live one time, and these opportunities don't always come. And the second is, know when it's time to take real risk. Because Chase Manhattan Bank at that point was not really a risk. My mom and dad were really happy. When I told them, however, that I was leaving the bank after I had been offered this huge opportunity to actually work with the chief operating officer of the whole bank, and that my parents said it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and so did the man at the bank, and so did my boyfriend. And I knew that at age 25, if I didn't go to Africa and try, I might never go again. And when I said to Tony Triciano and my mother and father that I was turning down that job offer, it was really the first time I could just hear this huge void on the telephone where my mom was just like staring at the wall in disbelief. And she was angry. And I never really made them angry. I never really had felt like I'd let them down in such a way. And because I wasn't sure that I was doing the right thing myself, it felt bad. And yet, it was the best decision I ever made in my whole life. But I cried the whole way to Africa, the whole way. I just cried. And then I got there, and I knew it was right. And so the second piece is, you need different sets of tools in your toolbox. So while I believe that you should choose joy, find those experiences that give you tools that are useful for the world, useful for others, and follow the leader. If you see a leader that really inspires you and you want to be like that leader, get close to that leader. Learn from that leader. And then finally, I do believe choose joy. I've had too many young people in my life get sick or lose their lives early, and all the stuff that they say about it going fast is true. And when I see the older people who I want to be like now, they retain a sense of curiosity and humor, and they focus on being interested in other people rather than trying to be interesting themselves. And that would be my last piece of advice.
Very good. Very good. Let's open it up for questions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe stand up and just so we can hear it, so other people can hear the question, please.
For those of us who find Acumen's idea of tackling poverty via like venture capital investment, how do you suggest we get involved? Can we get involved with Acumen, or are there other ways?
So when Lehman Brothers collapsed in 2008, this is no lie, over the next 3 weeks I got 400 emails from ex-Lehman Brothers bankers that had now decided they wanted to go into social investing. And I was really overwhelmed and didn't know how to respond to that because we had no job openings. And somewhat cavalierly said, why don't you start a chapter? And they did. And now we have 23 chapters around the world. There are 6,000 or 7,000 chapter members. And they typically have full-time jobs, but they are getting involved in social enterprise with each other. They connect to each other. So they are doing all kinds of cool things, both inside their companies as well as with our companies. We just had chapter members from Toronto, Vancouver, and New York, from BCG, the Royal Bank of Canada, and another consulting company, essentially use the resources of their companies to do a deep dive into privatization of extension services for smallholder farmers. It was an incredible thing that they did. So one, I would either think about starting a chapter or joining a chapter, but just to build a network for yourself with other young and older people that are involved in this sector, because people lead to other people, which lead to opportunity. We also have put these courses online, which people are, we just did one with IDEO.org on design for the bottom of the pyramid, and 20,000 people in 150 countries took it. And companies are coming out of that, and again, they're building this network. So that would be one of the things I would think about. And the other would be to just to find those companies on the ground in country that I would get involved with. Finally, the third thing, when I look at the skills that our companies need and that we need, supply chain management, working on the line, marketing, looking at companies like Unilever and more traditional manufacturing in the developing world will give you an incredible skill set to understand the real challenges that the societies face.
Jacqueline, where would they find information about these chapters? On your website, or can you give me?
It's on our website. I think it's under the community tab.
Okay.
Just acumen.org. Yeah.
You kind of touched on this already, but you mentioned the different tools that you need in your toolbox, and I was just asking what kind of unique skills you think need to be brought to the social entrepreneurial space in the next 5 to 10 years?
That's a great question. I think we need, long-term, we need investing skills, and that takes time to get experience actually in investing. But in some ways, more important, we need the operational building school skills. Skills in managing people, skills in transferring skills. Too often in social enterprise, elites go into communities and get a lot done really fast, and then they leave, and there's no infrastructure left for people to take whatever has been built to the next level, and it goes away. And so a combination of learning how to manage and learning how to teach. I definitely think when I look at the big challenges that our companies have are 3: hiring and building talent, marketing, and supply chain would be the 3 pieces.
Here in the second row.
Yeah.
Considering corruption and many other factors that impede progress, what is the bare minimum that Acumen requires to establish itself in a community?
The bare minimum to establish ourselves?
Yes.
I'm sorry, what do you mean by that?
Because, for example, you mentioned on the video that Acumen does not take into account the fact that businesses may have failed in a certain region, etc. So there are many difficulties, right?
Right.
So what's the minimum that you require to go?
So we would look at, when we look at new geographies, we look at 3 things. Is there an entrepreneurial pipeline? So are there companies that we could invest in fairly quickly, would be 1. 2, is there a business community that will partner with us? Because one of the reasons I started Acumen was I was sickened and sick and tired of the old model of we're here to help. That we needed to look at investment models where people were really working together. And 3rd was, could we raise local money to invest in these enterprises with us? And so I actually don't think it's about the violence and the corruption. I mean, we have built extraordinary companies in Pakistan and Nigeria. And I like nothing better than to say to the Nigerians when they're like, do you know what you're getting yourself into? And I'm like, yes, we work in Pakistan. And to say to the Pakistanis, we have so much to learn. There's such entrepreneurial spirit in both countries. In Pakistan, we've got a mobile banking company, which is now bringing 100,000 new customers, low-income customers online to mobile banking every 100 days. And so has just crossed the 1 million customer mark, run by 4 really amazing Nigerians. And another company called Sproxel, which allows you to, it's kind of got a blister pack on every vial of medicine, because 70% of medicines in most of the markets in which we work are corrupt, counterfeit. So here, you scratch off the number, you text it into your phone, and you're told whether the medicine is legitimate or counterfeit like that. And this thing has been used 5 million times already. So we can, it's been thrilling to me to see that you can build real businesses in these, in many of the countries in which we work. Where it's harder is real violence, in part because I don't want the team hurt and destabilized. And so that's the one thing that we've not yet gotten really that involved with. And then the other piece is the regulatory environments in which we work that can really slow down making things happen.
And with the green shirt.
So in our MBA VC class, we hear from a lot of investors who are saying, I wish I could invest in ABC type of company if only I could find the right entrepreneurs who could build it. Are there any great ideas, social enterprise ideas out there that you guys would love to invest in, but that don't have any great businesses out there that we should start building?
Well, if I were your age, so this is different because we are starting to invest in these. I think we are only starting to understand the power of mobile technology platforms and the implications for banking, for lighting, and for almost everything else that we do. We've invested in a company called M-Copa. So we had invested in a company called D-Light, which does a low-cost solar light. And we learned a couple things. One is that because you're working in very, very low-trust areas, it takes a long time for people to make the first step to go from kerosene to solar. And we had thought, why wouldn't you buy a cheaper, safer, more useful, cleaner product than buy kerosene all the time? But you're not sure it's going to be there. It may not last. You need at least some cash up front. So the first innovation is a lot of marketing up front. The second is using mobile platforms to pay little, kidogo kidogo, which is Swahili for little by little. So in Kenya, you can buy your M-Pesa, your M-Copa light with a few shillings every day as long as you're doing 50 shillings a month. And it's fascinating watching this thing grow. The next insight is that once you convert people to solar, it goes from being a push industry to a pull industry, and people want electricity. So with 1.5 billion people who have no electricity, there's a huge market for off-grid solutions to solar. But not just solar. We do biogas, biomass, microhydro, and solar. But I'm not yet convinced that people want light more than they want a cell phone charger. Mm-hmm. And so the companies that are most effective combine the two. And so if you've got a solar device with a cell phone charger, it flies off the shelves at price points that are confusing us because they're higher than we would have expected for people. And so if I were young, I would totally be watching this space because you've got, it changes lives. It's highly transactional, so you can grow it really fast. And it's got all kinds of applications. That would be mine. Where we have huge needs. 2.5 billion people have no toilets. We're invested in a really cool company, a really cool company. There are a lot of challenges. So you've got 3 million people living in slums in Nairobi. Open defecation. It's a place known for, or there are places known for the flying toilet. Since it's so dangerous to leave your house at night, to go to the really horrible latrine, you defecate on paper and you throw it. Flying toilets. So what this 3 students from MIT come up with is a way of creating a toilet latrine with 2 holes to separate liquid and solid waste. It has sawdust and a little vanity station so you can brush your teeth and look at the mirror. When you're finished, it doesn't smell, they're really beautiful, and the waste is collected every day. At the end of the day, the waste is composted, and they now have this new machine that can compost it all in 24 hours, and already they've moved 1,000 metric tons out of the slums. 10,000 metric tons out of the slums. That's a lot of you fill in the blank. And the idea is to convert that composted waste into organic fertilizer. The challenge for Acumen and for Sanergy, of course, is to commercialize human organic fertilizer, which in Southeast Asia was a big part of the agricultural miracle, and in Brazil. But right now, because it's new, it's going to take a while to break through, to get the FDA equivalent, to figure out the right distribution. I mean, this is stuff, obviously, I could talk about for hours. But waste to gold conversion, huge opportunity for you guys. And we didn't think that any African young men would want to carry human waste on a daily basis through the slums. It's turning out to be one of the high-prize jobs for the 250 young men who work at Sanergy. They have uniforms, it doesn't smell, and they're providing a really good public service. So that's another one. And the third area, which is really, really hard too, it's all hard. But you know what? You might as well work on hard things because it keeps you alive and curious, is healthcare delivery. We're terrible at healthcare delivery in this country and in other countries around the world. And finding both pricing models, so maybe the rich pay more and the poor pay less, as well as trying to really crack the code of rural distribution models, cold chains, how you get this stuff to the last mile. Huge opportunity and not enough innovation happening.
Well, on that note, I think we're going to finish this portion, but Jacqueline has graciously agreed to spend another half hour or so for people who want to meet in 121, which is just out the door around the corner to the left. And let's say if you have a book you want signed or to say hello to her, come up, but we'll start over there within 5 to 8 minutes. So if you have another question, please go over there and join me in thanking Jacqueline. It was great.
Thank you, guys.